Okay, if kind of have folks move towards their seats, we'll get started in about a minute here.
Where do you want me?
Well, here's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, you bet.
I don't like sitting next to you because I don't look as good then, you know. I got somebody really good looking next to me.
It's nice chiseled beard. Yeah.
Age. I'll take your age. How's that? I'll trade you looks for age.
Do we have another board member coming to sit down?
Treasurer,
Most of the people in this room,
secretary.
I'm looking around.
I think we're all good.
Here than I am.
Because I might.
You have to look
This is just
far
awkward.
and wide.
Okay.
Oh, but then I can't
Andy
see.
a little bit, but not much.
I'll try it again
Rocky
today,
Scott,
maybe
there
next
you
time.
go. Well, there's two. I'm happy. That's all I need. Nice lunch with Andrew last week. Yeah, anytime you started. How did I have a pen when I got here? And I don't have. Oh, I got a pen.
You go? Okay. No. Not right. Hey. Good morning. How are you, Joe?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. All right. Everybody ready?
Rocky's here.
Yep. Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our regular meeting of the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments. Appreciate the time. It's right at 9 o'clock sharp, so thanks everybody for being prompt. We'll begin with introductions. We do have a quorum. I'm Norm Steen, Teller County Commissioner. I'm your chair. Okay, Jill?
Jill Gabler, Colorado Springs. Sharon Thompson, Fountain.
Me. Yolanda Avila, Colorado Springs City Council.
Eddie Pico, Colorado Springs City Council.
Ken Juray, Manitou Springs.
Lojinos Gonzalez, El Paso County.
Rocky Scott, Transportation Commission.
Dave Kincaid representing USAFA.
Jake Middleton, Shreve Air Force Base.
John Doucette, 21st Phase, St. Peterson.
Hal Algar, Fort Carson.
Gary Storm, Military Affairs Council of the Chamber AEC.
Dick Elsner, Park County Commissioner.
Dennis Carpenter, Mayor Rama.
Andy Gunning, new employee with PPACG. New employee.
Mark Waller, El Paso County, the guy without a working microphone.
That's not intentional.
Neil Levy, Woodland Park.
Good morning. And there is a sign-up sheet going around, so just make sure you sign up before the meeting's over. Take a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Motion,
Sharon?
and do we have a second?
Second.
And any discussion? All's in favor? I'll say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion's approved for the agenda. Item 3A, public comments. Topics not on the agenda. Anybody in the public who'd like to address the board this morning? Seeing none, we'll move on. Item 3B, the FY 2019-2022 TIP public comment. We've been receiving public comment. There's some, in addition to the cards on your table at the 2045 plan, we're also taking public comment on the 2022 TIP. Any public comments on the Transportation Improvement Program? Seeing none, we'll move on. Item 4A, consent agenda. Anybody like to pull item off the consent agenda for separate consideration? If not, take a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Motion from Mayor Levy, and a second. A second from Commissioner Councilman Avila. Any discussion? All's in favor? Aye. Thank you. Consent is approved. Action items. Start with the legislative update. Jessica, yes, we are. And Jessica, maybe you could introduce your fine guest. Actually, not a guest. It actually is working on behalf of the Pikes Peak Council.
So this morning, you guys are lucky and pleased to get to meet Lauren Furman, our state lobbyist.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
So you will notice that your memo is almost identical to what you saw last month, other than it shows that you all took a position last month. There actually were a few new bills that came out after this was published. The one that we would like to talk to you guys a little about is Senate Bill 18196. So I'm actually going to have do you want me to give a quick description? Sure. This is concerning the repeal of the late vehicle registration fee. Right now, as you guys know, under the FASTR, if you are late registering your vehicle, you pay a late fee of $25 for each month, up to $100. This bill was discussed during the legislative committee meeting, but was one that we really wanted to bring to the whole group. So.
Yeah, very simple bill. Kind of a follow-up to some of the faster conversations over the years. I don't expect this bill to necessarily get through both chambers. It's going to have a pretty significant fiscal note on it, which always is the demise of certain pieces of legislation down at the state capitol. But in the vein of keeping within the transportation issues that I know are of interest to all of you, we certainly want to put that on the agenda and make sure you understood some of the bills that are coming along through the process.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mark.
Thank you. Lawrence, I think being polite about this piece of legislation, this bill's been run every year since FASTR passed, and this bill has not obviously passed as it's been run every year since FASTR passed, and I think that was 2010?
Mm-hmm.
So correct. Every year now for the last 9 years, this bill has been on the calendar. I don't, doesn't seem to me that it's anything we should weigh in on at this point in time. I think if it'll get through the Senate, and if it gets through the first committee in the House, then maybe we should take a look at it. But until then, I don't see it being worth spending our energy on.
Councilman Pico.
I rather agree, but I'm just curious as to who's running the bill, who's behind it.
Pretty much all the Republicans in the House.
To do away with fines
And the
for
Senate.
not registering your vehicle.
Well, it's just to reduce the fines over time. They had a real problem when that FASTR bill was passed in 2010, so they'd like to remove those fine provisions. So
Do they want to
That's the
reduce them or
intent.
zero?
eventually, I think they'd like to repeal them completely. So this is a reduction in them right now.
Any other questions or comments for Lauren? Is that a motion? You want to make a motion on a position,
To move to monitor, maybe?
if that's appropriate?
Sure. I move that we monitor this bill.
Made by
Mark Waller.
And a second from,
Second from Councilman Andy Pico.
okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor of monitor position, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, okay. Good. I think that's unanimous.
One of the things I did want Lauren to do for us is give us a quick update on Senate Bill 1, which is the big transportation funding bill that's been ongoing. Head nod says yes.
Great. So today, this morning, Senate Bill 1 will be heard on the second reading in the Senate, where I anticipate that it will pass, and then move to third reading tomorrow. And I anticipate that it will pass there as well, move over to the House. And this is, I think, an opportunity for the House Democrats and leadership to really decide whether or not they want to start negotiating through Senate Bill 1 and using that as a vehicle, or if the House Speaker has decided that she just has no appetite for working through Senate Bill 1, wants to kill the bill and then start all over and offer up her own ideas for funding transportation in a new bill, and then send that over to the Senate. So right now, we're kind of in a bit of a state of dysfunction on transportation issues. The only thing right now that has prevailed is the $148 million that is in the governor's proposed budget for one-time funding of transportation for this year. And I know that the governor's office would like to see another $100 million dedicated out of the state budget for for future years, but for right now, his proposal is just $148 million. So really what we're counting on is the House and the Senate to come to some kind of agreement on more funds out of the out of the general fund for funding, so that we can see some additional funds dedicated to the transportation needs around the state. There are new revenue dollars that are coming into the state based on the federal tax reform bill. The question is, how much of it can we see through the general fund? That's just a big question mark right now. We're going to see a new revenue forecast just in a couple days. That'll give us a better indication of how much new revenue we're going to see. But right now, it's just folks are just a bit nervous down at the Capitol, at least in the governor's office, of what those new dollars will look like for the long term.
Maybe I could just a couple additional comments. So the Senate Bill 1 is the obviously the first Senate bill introduced this session. It dedicates 10% of existing state sales tax to transportation, existing state sales tax. With a strong economy, that's still a growing number. Lauren is absolutely, right on the mark. With the federal tax plan, which left more money in the pockets of people in Colorado, more money which can be taxed by the state of Colorado, which creates that additional funding stream. I've seen that's between $300 million and maybe up to $700 million of new revenue. We don't know yet.
Depending on who you ask.
It'll be huge. Some people are seeing that as new revenue, a structural change to revenue in the state of Colorado, which would produce a long-term funding stream. Others see that as, well, still at the whim of the legislature as to how that additional funding stream is spent, and would want to rely instead on a more dedicated funding stream. So, Laura, could you maybe talk about some of the referendum that are being proposed by Denver?
Yeah, and there are other dynamics outside of the Capitol, obviously. There are other business groups that are interested in seeing some more sustainable funding sources through a sales tax increase or an increase in the state ownership tax. So we're seeing at least 4 ballot initiatives that are being proposed by the Denver Metro Chamber of some kind of increase in the sales tax, whether it's a penny or a half a penny or a quarter of a penny. So those are right now being proposed for the ballot, and I think there's another group that may or may not propose an increase of the state ownership tax, and so I can talk a little bit more about that if you have an interest in that. But those are kind of the competing ballot initiatives from other business groups right now.
I think the specific ownership tax was supported by the Colorado Springs Chamber.
Yes, correct.
So, yes, SOT you may have heard it referred to. Yes. Anybody have comments or questions? Legislation, on SB1 or others? Great. Well, thank you for the update. Appreciate you being here. And
absolutely.
Thanks for all the hard work you're doing.
Of course. Appreciate you having me. Thank you very much.
Just one other. I know.
Yes,
that was
absolutely.
All of our legislative committee. And the other legislative thing we wanted you all to know is the JBC did increase the Area Agency on Aging state funding for 2019 by $4 million. So
that's important
because you all know that we're home of the Pikes Peak Area Agency on Aging. So
yeah, there was concern whether we'd be drying up at the end of the quarter, the fourth quarter for the state fiscal year. And Joe, early conversation of this meeting indicated we're a little bit out of the. Joe, you might want to cut away what that means for us, if you wouldn't mind. Just come up and why this is important to PPACG and AAA.
Joe Urban, Area Agency on Aging. I think many people have followed our travails through these continuing resolutions, and we're at a point now where the State Controller's Office has agreed to allow us to encumber the federal funds. Prior to them getting here, they've arrived safely for 50 straight years, so it's not a tough bet. But they will allow us to do that. That's going to give us all of our carryover funding from 2017. Which we had not gotten, and then in addition we'd get the remaining federal funds for this year. So we're not going to have to cut programs, which is what we were looking at over the course of the next month and a half.
Okay, great news. And Jessica, while you're up here, if you would please give us an update on where we are on the site visits. Remember, we've talked about this in past months. With our new executive director, Andy Gunning, on board, one of the things we'd like to do is to get Andy out to visit each of the member governments of the Pikes Peak Area Council. We're talking about site visits. The concept would be that you, the member of the board, would be our host, meaning Andy's host and the members of the executive board, visiting your governments at your location, preferably during a work session or a regular convening of your board. First of all, a couple things to present information about PPACG, what things we've done over the years, why it's important to stay engaged in Pikes Peak Council, and then ask for input, feedback, ideas as we head into the strategic plan later this year. That's the concept. And Jessica, if you kind of give us an update where we are with those schedules.
So we did reach out to all of our members. Right now, we're set for April 3rd with Teller County, Victor, and Cripple Creek all working together. April 4th with the City of Fountain. April 10th at the City of Colorado Springs pre-meeting workshop. April 10th with the Manitou Springs. April 17th with Green Mountain Falls. April 19th with Woodland Park. May 7th with Park County, Alma, and Fairplay. Our location is still on hold because nobody has officially agreed to host. And May 14th with Calhan and possibly Rama. We do not yet have responses or actually anything even tentatively proposed for Monument, Palmer Lake, or El Paso County. So,
Excuse me, Jess, we're going to have to change the 19th. I'm sorry. I talked to Andy about it already. I think I'm going to be out of town for a high school baseball game or something crazy like that. So we'll change that. It doesn't have to be council meeting, does it? But
it doesn't have to be.
Could be. I'll be in touch. We'll let you know, see when it works for you and Andy.
Well, and one of the things that I do want to add into how Norm described this, it's important for each of you as our members to have the chance to tell Andy why you're members of PPACG, what the value is for you, and what you'd like to see us doing for you. Some of our members don't always have the chance to define that, not for themselves or to us. And so we're really excited about this opportunity for each of you to say, here's why we're members, here's why it matters, and repeat that to all of your elected officials who may or may not ever attend these meetings.
Let me also say, although we have not, our military friends, very, very important to our mission here. If you would like to schedule additional meetings with Andy and the executive board here, I'm more than happy to meet with your leadership team and answer questions and any further engage. So leave it entirely up to you, and if you maybe coordinate through Jessica.
If you need my business card today, I will happily help.
Yep, and thank you.
Have Andy come to one of the MAC meetings at board meetings as well.
Will you take my business card and send me an email? Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you guys very much.
Okay. Action item 5B, FY 2017, FY 2022 TIP Amendment 16. Ken Prather. Our Acting Transportation Director for another short time.
Yes, Ken Prather, Acting Transportation Director at PPACG. Last month, you released TIP Amendment number 16 for public comment. Today, it's back before you for final action. This amendment adds the El Paso County portion of the I-25 GAP project to our TIP. It's a 2-mile section of the total 18-mile project. DRCOG, Denver Council of Governments, is doing the same thing for its TIP and its long-range plan for the 16 miles in Douglas County. For the project to move forward, it must be in the two Council of Governments plans and TIPs. During the month, we received 2 emails directly. CDOT held 8 listening sessions at which 165 people attended. On February 24th, the El Paso County Commissioners held a public meeting up at Lewis Palmer High School on a Saturday morning. They taped it and made the video available on their website. Michael Lewis, the CDOT Executive Director, attended and made a presentation. John Hall, the I-25 GAP CDOT Project Manager, was there. They answered questions from the audience. There was at least 50 people from the public that attended that meeting. The general summary is everybody thinks something needs to be done, that the road needs to be widened. There is differences of opinion on whether it should be 1 or 2 lanes in each direction, and whether one or both or neither of those lanes should be tolled or general purpose. CDOT has not finished the EA. They're getting ready to go out to the public on that in April, with finalizing the environmental assessment in May. During that time period, in the next couple of months, they will make the final determination as to what the project will actually be and what the total cost will be. So what we have in our tip, the wording is such that it can accommodate all of the options that have been identified by the public to us so far. Nothing we have received or heard would require us to change our tip entry in the wording in the project description. So I'll be happy to answer any questions. And
Would you address what happens if this board were to vote no on this tip amendment?
The project will not receive federal approval if it's not in the tip. Now, the 2 options one is that CDOT rescopes the project and does not come into El Paso County, so it's only a Dr. Cog project. The other would be they keep it as an entire single project and it dies.
So the vote today, this board could terminate the I-25 expansion by a vote in a few moments.
At least in El Paso County.
At least in El Paso County. I just want to let you know that the gravity of your vote. That's all I'm saying. Any questions for Ken?
Commissioner Waller ahead.
Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have one question. This came up on our last Saturday meeting, and I don't think we got a great answer, and maybe Rocky can answer this one as well. I understand there's going to be a study done to determine, what the appropriate amount of the toll is going to be, but the question came up, who is the authority that allows that to happen? Who is the authority that actually signs the order saying, yep, we're going to toll this, and this is what the toll is going to be? I think there was some discussion that it's the Transportation Commission, but I'm not sure that's accurate.
Rocky?
There's a combination of responsibilities. The allocation of money comes from the transportation. The decision puts, obviously, CDOT staff in place. The tolling decisions are made by the High Performance Technology, High Performance Transportation. And that's its statutory role. It was created by the legislature to find ways to generate new revenue to help pay for it.
Who sits on that board or that commission? Okay, are all the transportation commissioners on both?
No. There are 2 transportation commissioners there are 3, on the HPTE board.
How many people are on the HTPE board, do you know?
We have 7, I believe.
And are they all gubernatorial appointees?
They come from different, actually, they're appointed from different areas. Some are appointed by the Transportation Commission and others appointed by the governor.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Questions for Ken or other discussion? Mahinos? Commissioner?
For the packet here, as I've made it every meeting where this has come up and I see the numbers, first I see the CDOT from Karen Rowe. Initial funding sources for the project have been identified as $25 million in local funds. That should be up to $25 million because we do not know whether, based on taxes and everything, we will make that. And is also included in this ACG document. It has listed an absolute number of $25 million local El Paso County CPRTA. Once again, that is not a guaranteed $25 million. And so I want to make sure that's on the record, as I have done at every meeting where I've seen that listed, because that is not an absolute.
Once CDOT identifies the actual scope of the project, it will identify the actual cost, and at that point, there will need to be a commitment of the funds there, or again, an alternate source of funding will have to be found, or the project gets rescoped to reflect the amount of funds that's available. The federal funding, the infra grant, is still up in the air, and we won't know whether that's awarded until later this spring. So when that all comes together.
I just wanted that acknowledged.
Right.
Rocky.
Yeah, so going back to when we started this process, and I think the forecast was it would be a 10-year project, and everybody said clearly not okay for all the reasons we understand. CDOT found a way to potentially accelerate the project to include, actually at this point, construction beginning this November and being complete in the spring of 2021. The budget for that minimal project, because as we all know, transportation funding is a huge issue in Colorado, is $350 million. $65 million of that is hopefully from an infra grant, which is a federal grant. The infra grant, the federal statutes that define, I don't know if it's a statute it is or a regulation, but it says if you make any changes to your application after it's submitted, it's going to make it very unlikely that the federal grant is provided. So if we lose the 65, I'd say the probability of starting construction in November is virtually nil, at which point we need to find another 65 million plus whatever else we lose from whatever source and restart the design process. So I think, as you're saying, this is a significant issue. My concern, to be honest with you, you got the federal issues there. There are a lot of issues that go into design that go beyond. It's very important to hear what we're hearing from the public. It's also important to realize that CDOT's responsibility is to balance cost, schedule, safety, use of tolling, availability of the ability for safety vehicles to get from place to place with the kind of speed that we would all like, the availability of people to get from place to place. And so when you balance all of that, there are a lot of trade-offs. And at the moment, the EA actually is going to be released. The public release will be April 18th. And there are 3 actions being considered: no action, action with general purpose, action with an express lane. I think it's likely, based upon past commission policy, based upon the findings we've had from express lanes elsewhere, that it's likely, but it's not certain, that the express lane will be the proposed design. And in that fact, that's what the infra grant, when it was submitted, indicated, that there would be an express lane. Just reviewing the April 17th boards from the public meeting in Colorado Springs, and it says that express lanes are an option. So this is not a new topic. It shouldn't be a new topic for anybody, quite frankly. My fear is when I look at the severe funding shortages that we have and the needs that there are across the state, that if we lose the 65 and therefore lose the SB 267 money, the $250 million that the Commission has already allocated tentatively to this project, that it could be years before we see any improvements on the I-25 gap.
Okay. Further questions, comments?
Just
Mark?
thank you.
Commissioner?
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate those comments. I think one of the things we've talked significantly about is the probability of getting the 265 or the 65 million from the infra grant program in the first place. I've heard everything from it's an absolute total long shot you guys are in really good shape. So hard to know where that is. None of us controls the federal government that way. I know we were in D.C. last week, had some pretty significant discussions with the U.S. Department of Transportation, and Commissioner Littleton specifically asked the question about tolling and award of grants, and the response she got from the U.S. DOT was that it not something they require. Also, I think that sort of talking about the rigidity of the scope of money and where it's coming from and how much the project is going to cost. My understanding is all that stuff is still kind of up in the air. In fact, on Saturday, John Hall from CDOT said, actually we think this is going to be less than $350 million. First time I heard that. So you kind of understand, and that's kind of a little bit of a challenge. And one thing I wanted to point out specifically about the allocation of the $10 million from RTA, based on how the member governments wanted to structure that the ballot language definitely said up to $10 million, and that has to be revenue over budget. That was very specific in the ballot language, and we just, the RTA doesn't have the statutory authority to put more money in if revenues don't come in above budget, and so we'll have to figure that out as well. Hopefully, the economy is going to continue to grow, and it looks like projections say that money will be there, but, you never know.
And, Mr. Chairman, I understand all that. I agree with all that. I think the question here is, how do we maximize the probability that we actually start construction at a point in time when it's going to make a positive difference? And I submit that while all those uncertainties are out there, there is a path that will reduce the uncertainties, and there is a path that will increase the uncertainties. And the failure to proceed on this path that's being proposed right now, I submit, is going to increase the uncertainties and improve the probability that the project doesn't get done when we all want it to get done.
Rocky, could you tell us again when we expect the decision on the infra grant? Is that mid-April?
We need the EA first, and the EA, the public release, as I said, is April 18th. Public hearings May 3rd and 10th. There'll be a 30-day review through May 18th, and then the decision document on the EA will be out on June 18th. So it's going to be somewhere in that time frame.
And tell us again what your characterization is if that doesn't pass. Is there any chance at all? We got to find $65 million somewhere, is what you said.
I will tell you, sitting on the commission and looking at the statewide needs, there are a lot of variables out there still, right? For example, Senate Bill 1, people give it a different probability of passing, but if Senate Bill 1 does pass, then 267 money, I think that's going to be, according to Commissioner Waller, is going to be resolved, but it would eliminate 267 in some places, and which then means that the pressure on other places expecting 267 money is going to increase to take out whatever funds are available. So I'll only, I think the point is the squeeze is on statewide, and every dollar that we want to get that's more than what is currently programmed is going to be a major challenge.
Other comments?
Yeah, I just say that my understanding is the amendment to protect the first tranche of 267 money is being run on the floor today if Senate Bill 1 actually does come up on the Senate floor today.
And then we have, at least three ballot issues, potential ballot issues. So there are a lot of variables out there. 4?
Yeah. So just a little background, that Senate Bill 1, the current transportation bill, does repeal Senate Bill 267, last year's transportation funding bill. If that's repealed, then that funding stops, but what we're talking about here is that bridge money, the first tranche of allocation from 267, carrying through until Senate Bill 1 funding, if it's passed, kicks in. That's the issue.
Yeah, and one other clarification. I understand that U.S. DOT said tolling isn't a requirement, but they do have a written requirement that said if you change the proposal after it's submitted, that change will probably mean that the proposal will not be considered.
Any other discussion? got a issue. Taking the motion, the proposed motion is to approve fiscal year 2017-2022 TIP Amendment 16. Proposed motion, anybody want to make that motion?
Yeah, I move we approve the TIP amendment.
Second.
Motion and a second from Councilman Pico and Commissioner Waller. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, item 5C, 2045 plan scoring criteria. Ken, tell us why this is important.
Yeah, let me see if I can do this a little bit better than I did at Friday's workshop. So let me step back and put scoring criteria kind of into the context. Many of you weren't here 4 years ago when we did this the last time. Last year, the board approved the goals, objectives, targets, and scenarios for the 2045 long-range plan that we're developing right now. The next steps are to develop the scoring criteria, the technical criteria that we will use to evaluate the projects, as well as the weights for those criteria or the priorities of those weights. You know, if air quality and safety are two criteria, which one's more important to us? So that's kind of the weighting. We're currently scheduled to do a call for projects based on using these criteria and weights next month after the board hopefully approves the criteria if we stay on schedule and approves the weights next month. We would do a call for projects. They would be turned in, the application submitted to us by the end of July. Staff would begin scoring the projects on the 1st of August. And what happens is staff will score the projects. We will present the scores back to the TAC, which is also the project applicants and your staff. And they will review the scores and come back and say, you know, my project should get 2 points more on this criteria and a half point more on this one. And we will, as staff, take those comments, go back, evaluate them, and sometimes we do change the scores. Sometimes we find that the concept that was presented applies to everybody. So rather than just changing the score on one project, we would reevaluate every project with that new concept. So these revised scores come back to the TAC and then come to you for approval of the scores. After projects are scored, we rank them by that scoring, prioritize them, compare them against the money that's available, and say, okay, here's all the projects that are above the funding line and those that below the cutoff line. Then there's always some horse trading because somebody will identify that their project didn't really fit into the scoring criteria very well. It's important. It's needed. They can't do something that was approved as a draft for draft funding because this project needs to be done first. So they'll say, you know, we're willing to take that one out and move this one up above the funding line. So there is that kind of professional judgment that comes after the scoring is done. We're not hanging our hat on the project scores, but they are important. And then those revised scores with the weighting, that total scoring comes back to the board with the funding list, and so we come up with a draft funded list for the 2045 plan. And then there's the rest of the public process and planning process to finish out the development of the plan. But obviously the meat and the most important thing for most people is that project list. So that's what we're leading up to. Right after the board approved the last target last November, I went to TAC and CAC and introduced the concept of scoring criteria to them. They were organized under the bullets that you had in your packet, those 9 bullets. And it was just a discussion, and we introduced the concept of negative scores. We've not used negative scores in the past, and it has created a known issue that for whatever reason we've never changed in the past. But a project would receive, if a project is, let's say it's safety, if it does not change safety, then it would be not applicable and receive 0 points. Now, if a project actually increases the risk of injuries or death, then that's worse than not applicable, but we never had a negative score, so it got 0, the same as a project that was not applicable. And there are projects that increase the risk of injury and death. So we introduced this concept based on the feedback at those November meetings. Staff developed a straw man list of the 13 criteria that, or 12 criteria that you see before you today. TAC had 2 meetings to discuss this in February. CAC had 1. After some lengthy discussions and give and take on everybody's part, you do have the 12 criteria before you today. TAC, CAC, and staff agree on the 12 criteria, that these are the ones that are most appropriate to use. We also agree on how to use, how many points, how do you apply the points based on that criteria out of 7 out of the 12. So it's only 5 criteria that we have a difference on how to assign points to those criteria. And with your indulgence, I would propose that we start with those 5 to explain the differences, work our way through those, and then if you have questions or want further discussion on the other 7, we can always go to those. But at least you've got a uniform recommendation on the other 7. So it is these 5 where there is differences between TAC, CAC, and staff. If that's all right, I'll proceed that way. It's okay? Going to criterion 2, 3, and 4, these are mobility criteria that when they were first presented to TAC, they were organized and listed under those category bullets that are in your memo. So we had 3 criteria that were listed under mobility as far as the organization. And the recommendation and the initial straw man had negative scores for the auto mobility, but did not have negative scores for the transit and non-motorized. Still had positive scores only for those 2 categories. TAC felt it was important to be consistent under each category. So under mobility, with these 3 criteria, they should all be negative or should all be positive only. The discussion centered around that the likelihood of somebody submitting a project that would reduce ridership for transit or reduce pedestrian or bicycle usage would be very low. It would be unreasonable to expect somebody to submit a project to reduce, transit would not submit a project to reduce ridership. So their feeling, for the sake of consistency, is that the mobility, transit mobility and non-motorized mobility, which were positive only, then your auto mobility should be changed to positive only for consistency within that category. And so that's what you see is the recommendation there, where they go from 0, no change, to +9 for reducing PM peak hour vehicle hours of travel. when CAC saw this, they agreed with the concept of the negative, and they also pointed out that it's not just MMT or Fountain submitting a project to reduce a transit project to reduce ridership, but it's the impact of other projects, a road project that might impact and impede these other categories. And some examples were given out, such as there was a road diet project, 3-lane arterial, 3 lanes in each direction, and it was reduced to 2 lanes to add a dedicated, very wide protected bike lane to increase ridership. This would have a negative impact on congestion and mobility for the autos, although it would be an improvement for the bicycles. So there is this kind of a cross. Somebody's got their cell phone on, which is usually the source of. So staff felt that no projects are not built in a vacuum, that they do affect other modes, other traffic users. So their recommendation was that we should have negative scores, and so that was their recommendation for mobility, or for transit and non-motorized. And this, quite frankly, was an oversight on staff's part, because with our own philosophy of having negative scores, we should have had that as well from the beginning. So we agreed with CAC. So that's the difference there was the development of a positive scores for the sake of consistency. And I do have as support Jim from the CAC and Brian Vituli, the chair of the TAC. So if I misspeak something or misrepresent their positions, I do ask them to jump forward and correct me, please.
Kenny proposing we go through these criterion by criterion? We have 5 that are kind of in discussion.
Yeah, these first 3 were all developed and differ because of the same reason. So that's just why I'm saying that. But in a way, it makes sense if you want to discuss and agree on these 3 before we move on, or doesn't have to be a separate vote.
Let's maybe proceed with the discussion. So if you're following along with us, we're on agenda item 5C, attachment 2, and you'll see that the 3 entities, CAC, TAC, and staff, on these 5 criterion, the criterion 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7, are some discussion is appropriate and guidance from the board how to proceed. And then let me suggest that we then vote on, once we've talked through these 5, then vote on a full package for the whole criteria together.
Okay.
So on criterion number 2, any other questions? This primarily differences on the negative scoring, or whether or not that's appropriate on mobility for auto and freight.
I believe what he's asking, though, is that we accept the same for 2, 3, and 4, right? So that we don't have some rating being negative and some being not having negative numbers.
We could go back and cover 1, 2, and 3. My suggestion was to take the whole package in approval once we worked through the. Would you suggest something other?
No, I'm just saying, I think 2, 3, and 4, and what is the other one that had the
2,
negative
3,
numbers?
4, 5, and 7.
Kind of need to be looked at as a package, that we're going to either do negative numbers or not negative numbers on all of them, so that we're not doing different things on them. Is that what, I believe that's what you're asking, correct?
However you feel more comfortable doing it. If I just explained these 3 because
Right.
the reasoning for the difference affected those 3. The others are slightly
Yeah, 2,
different.
3, and 4 especially.
Yeah.
Right. It would be easier if they were all, so I think what I'm hearing is it would be easier for to work on if you don't say adopt TAC for 2 and CAC for 3 and,
Right.
so either adopt one or the other for these 3 particular.
Well, it would be easier, but you can certainly do it that way.
Yeah. No, I understand. You're standing there telling us we're not going to tell us what to
Okay.
do. Guess I'm speaking more to the other members, that's what you're asking.
So to kind of get the issue, any questions on the negative scoring? Any sense of whether that's appropriate? Any feedback from the board for Ken? Or if 2 chairs want to come up and answer any questions, they're available. 0 to 9 or the -9 to +9, which of the 2 scoring criteria would be more effective in the board's view? Right? Chairman of our TAC.
Ken, thank you. Good morning. Brian Vituli, City of Colorado Springs Mountain Metro Transit and Chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee meeting. I don't have a whole lot of different material to give you than what Ken presented, but I just wanted to say that over February, the TAC met 2 times on this issue, spent probably 4 hours or 4+ hours on this item, and so we put a lot of thought and a lot of consideration into this. And as what Ken said, we're very good with 7 of the criteria. There's unanimous recommendation. It's just the 5 that we differ. And tax rationale for these 5 criteria were, as members of the TAC, and we're going to be submitting projects for our entities. None of us are going to submit bad projects. So we felt that the negative scores were kind of just not necessary in this case. And also for criteria 2, 3, and 4, we also restructured the ranges of the point spread. So you can see how the ranges differ for mobility for auto and freight, and mobility and for non-motorized. So we did put a lot of thought into trying to make those point ranges a little bit more sensitive. So those are some of the key differences between the TAC and the CAC and PPACG staff. And obviously, we will respect whatever the board decides on, and we'll work within that framework. We really don't have any bad options. Although I will say, as a TAC chair, that the TAC and the TAC members, we do feel confident and comfortable with the TAC recommendation for all 12 criteria.
Yeah. Jill?
Any questions?
So, Brian, I hear what you say about you would not submit a project that wasn't applicable. What about in regard to what Ken said, how you may submit a project that for a particular mode, but it has an impact on a different mode?
Mm-hmm.
How do you respond to that in regard to negative scoring?
Well, several of us TAC members were at the CAC meeting when that was brought up, and that was, it's actually a very good point. It's something that I didn't really consider during our TAC discussions. But I think the way that it's broken out to kind of evaluate projects and how they impact other modes is a fine idea. So I'd be good with that.
Well, I guess part of my question is that a valid concern? I mean, I don't know enough about the scoring. Do you actually consider other modes typically on a project?
I think in the past, as Ken said, some of these projects were scored in a silo. So if it was a transit project, it got an NA for other criteria. If it was a non-motorized project, the same. But I think scoring in this way with measuring the impacts along other criteria is a good way to go.
So you think that's fair?
I think so.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Jim, do you have any comments you want to roll in? Just for questions.
I probably ought to just take questions. Jim Moore, First Vice Chair for the CAC. I do want to share a little bit of the perspective that the CAC had on this conversation, because we recognized from the very beginning that we're trying to bring objectivity to what is essentially a subjective process. And so it's an artificial construct at the end of the day. It's meant to be a tool for staff. I know there's nobody around the table in the CAC that wants to get involved in trying to actually score these things when they come in. And I would assume the same holds for the members of the board. So we began with a bias toward what the staff was recommending. We felt that this was staff insight into how they would use the tool. But as we moved through the discussion, we heard the presentation from the representatives from the TAC and recognized that they also bring their own expertise to it. So we ended up with a compromise, and our recommendation for your consideration was that we accept the TAC recommendation with the exception of Goal 2, where we would keep the original staff recommendation, which does have the negative impact on some of the areas, and to Ms. Gabler's perspective, that it's a new question. What are the collateral impacts? That this helps to give some value to asking that question and applying a value if there is a sense of a negative impact, much as Ken's reference to Research Parkway and that initiative, which created its own set of challenges afterwards. So, like Brian, I'm prepared to address any questions people might have about the CAC discussion.
Keep in mind that all this data, all this recommendations is going to be presented to this board for a final decision. This is just informative information. It is still this board's decision as to how we score projects, how to rank them in the tip. All this is just background information leading up to a level of confidence on a scoring criteria. But in the end, when it comes to the board of ranking decisions, projects in the tip, it is still this board's decision. The question is, how much reliability do you want to place in that recommendation? What criteria do you want to see in that recommendation coming before this board? So it's really is what's most useful to you when the recommendation comes to you. What's going to be most meaningful to you when a recommendation comes to you? What basis do you want to lie behind that recommendation? So, Ken?
Thank you. I will agree with Brian that nobody wants to submit a bad project. The perfect project is going to score 118 raw points because we've got 12 criteria, 9 points each. It's going to get 118. A less than perfect project is going to get something less in total, depending on what it is decided here. And in my example earlier, a different one is we always push for more mobility. More mobility, if it's above 45 miles an hour, increases emissions, is bad for air quality. So you've got one that's good, one that's desired, and then you've got a negative impact as a complication. Kind of like you take medicine. It's for desired effect, it's good, but they've always got a side effect that you don't like, but it's worth the price for you. And so that's all that this does is to identify those side effects that might be there, that might not be on another project, and it helps you to compare those two projects, one with side effects, one without.
Ken, could you talk about criterion 5 and 7? In both of those two, the staff has recommended something different than both the TAC and the CAC.
Well, in this case, I'm thinking, and correct me here, Brian, if I'm wrong, the original straw man that staff developed was the negative scores, what we're continuing to recommend here. Again, this is where TAC developed a positive scale only. So a good project would still get 9 points, but the less good the project was, the closer you get to 0, but it would never have a negative impact. CAC spent a lot of time on the discussion of the earlier criteria and started to run out of time. And as Jim said, they developed a compromise where they held to some and they just adopted the others that TAC had recommended.
And I'm not charging on logic. I just want to kind of walk through the process
Yeah.
for how we arrive something differently. That's all.
So that's how TAC agreed with the development, or CAC agreed with TAC's sticking with our philosophy of wanting the possibility of using a negative score, if it's applicable, that it be there. Doesn't say that it's going to get a negative score, because maybe a project will never have a bad enough project for this criteria that it would get a negative score. But we want, the one thing I've learned over the years is that we, no matter how good we develop the criteria and how much thought we put into it, there's always several projects that come in that don't fit the mold. And we're just trying to better the mold here to reduce those numbers of oddballs that still have to be addressed. For number 7, the straw man was the tax recommendation positive only. And this is, again, one that I said this is simply an oversight on staff's part in our original straw man, that with the philosophy of using negative scores should have that possibility. The positive scores are all the same. We've just allowed negative scores if something comes through that is applicable.
Okay, is it all clear?
So,
Tyler.
I must be missing something. I don't see the downside of having negative scores. I mean, if all projects are perfect and you never use negative scores, what's the problem with having that available in the rare chance that a poor project comes in? I think I'm missing the discussion. I mean,
there would be a slight impact on the scoring if it was positive only. You know, your option would be 0 to 9 or 1 to 9.
Correct.
If you allow the negative score, then rather than just getting a 1 or a 0, you might actually get a -1 or a -3. So there would be a slight possible reduction that could occur for that one criteria. It's not that you're going to ever get a project that the total score of the project is a negative number. We're talking individual criteria is really where you're only going to see the impact of a possible negative score, negative points.
Yeah, it makes sense to me to have negative scoring in there on some of these criteria. The argument that he's going to be positive, and it's going to have a negative impact on something else, I mean, that is reality. I mean, we see that all the time. So it makes sense. It's just, as we work through the different recommendations here, trying to come up with a consistency, because everybody has different, everybody meaning TAC, CAC, and staff, each have conflicting recommendations in several different places and in both directions. So I think that's just kind of trying to work through that thing. I understand the concept, trying to figure out which one it is. And congratulate you on giving me a headache on Friday. And it's stayed with me all weekend. So.
Yeah, we talked for this about an hour on Friday at our work session, so this is round 2 for some of us. Very, very helpful, though. I have a question. Brandy?
If the chair doesn't mind, I would like to make an attempt to answer Trustee Stevens' question. So I think you're right. Negative numbers aren't bad, per se, but in that particular goal 2, the issue that we had is with transit, they're not going to submit a project that decreases ridership. So the likelihood of them getting a negative score is very minimal. So if they have a project that's relatively never going to get that negative score, then that puts the mobility for auto and freight at a disadvantage, because there are instances where they could get that negative score. So we were looking for something that was consistent, that you could rate across the board, that wouldn't favor one mode versus the other. And I can tell that Councilmember Pico has a question.
Yeah, yes, sir. Anthony.
Well, not a question, but a comment. Yeah, I agree that Metro would never submit something that would be a negative score, but some other project might have something that would negatively impact Metro. So that you could end up, another project could generate a negative number for that, while it generates positives in something else. And I think seeing that kind of interaction would probably be helpful as we work through. And we're talking generically here
Right.
without having any particular project in mind. But I see that it would be beneficial to see that. Now, top of my head, I can't imagine one that would.
Right, I
But
can't even imagine one
I
that
think
would,
potentially it is there. Hypothetically, you could do something.
Right.
You could, for example, designate a freight corridor someplace that would cut off a transit route. I don't know anybody would actually do that, but having the negative
Right,
scoring.
the option exists.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
The likelihood is just small, so that's why we felt, given the likelihood of the projects in total.
Well, I agree the likelihood is small, but I think potentially it's there, and I think there's some
Right,
value in
I mean,
having
the
that.
potential exists.
Yeah.
So we were just going for the larger, broader scope of projects rather than the outliers.
So kind of bring this to us.
Just like Brandy, though, anything that says mobility in it, 2, 3, and 4, basically need to have the same
Yes,
recommendation.
yes, it would be much better if they're either all 0 to 9 or all -9 to +9, one way or another. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? We kind of may bring this to so let's just focus on the 5 that we're in disagreement on, maybe some guidance. Did you have some comments, Vicki?
If I may.
All right.
Victoria Chavez, El Paso County. I'm going to try and sort of boil this down for you and make it a little bit easier. We strongly feel that, and I have the voice of the City of Colorado Springs, I've discussed this with them as well, but we strongly feel that the committee process is very important, and so we would ask that you look to the committee to make a recommendation and not take a recommendation that the committees did not support. So we think we could live with what the CAC has come up with, and so we would ask that you maybe look to the CAC's recommendation.
And you're speaking for the TAC.
I'm speaking for El Paso County.
Okay.
As well as Tim Roberts of Colorado Springs, who was not able to be here.
Okay.
Well, if I may,
Yes, Andy?
the committees disagreed. So how do you take the committee's recommendation when there's two different recommendations?
I recommended that you look at the CAC's recommendation.
Okay.
Because we did have an opportunity to present to the CAC, and we did have an opportunity to talk with them, but the TAC does not have the ability to hear from the CAC before we meet. So we don't hear from the CAC when we make our decisions, but we did get a chance to talk to the CAC. So we would be comfortable with the CAC's recommendations.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
You're giving me another headache, but that's okay.
And I was trying to make it easy.
Okay, so then I have a question, because in the only case where that would leave I'm looking for the one where CAC, criterion 5, TAC is going to a 0 to 9 only, no negative scoring in criterion 5, and that is the
5 and 7.
5 and
are the
7
two.
would remain a 0 to 9. All others would be a -9 to a +9. 5 and so.
Can we just, I'm sorry, I need to move, I need to do this a little slower.
Okay. Question, Jerry?
No, number 1, everybody's on the same page, so.
Yes. Yes.
Criteria number 1. Okay. Criteria number 2. Were you speaking to the mic? I'm sorry.
Sharon Thompson from the Fountain.
I'm
speaking.
sorry. Okay, so criteria number 1, maintenance, everybody's on the same page, so that's an easy one. Okay, criteria number 2, mobility for auto and freight.
On the same page.
No, they're not TAC,
I'm sorry,
CAC,
2,
and staff.
2, 3, 4, 5, and 7. Right.
Right, I'm going a little slower.
Go ahead.
Okay, some of us move slower before noon. Okay, so criteria 2, mobility, auto, and freight, you're saying that you're saying what? TAC, CAC, or staff?
The staff agrees with CAC, so.
So you're saying CAC? Is your
I'm not saying
recommendation for
anything.
more?
I'm not saying anything. I'm chairing the meeting. I'm opening discussion for people who have something important to say.
My recommendation would be go a little bit slower, because just going 2, 3, 5, it's very hard, I believe, to follow. So maybe I just move slower than some people, but sorry, that's just the way it goes. Okay. So 2, 3, and 4, though, we want to make sure they all have the same. So the discussion and decision needs to be whether we go with CAC or staff?
Yes, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7 are all in discussion because they're disagreement among the three.
Right.
We've heard recommendations from several to go with a CAC recommendation, and Ken, the planner, is defending a staff recommendation. So it's our decision to make which criteria we proceed with. What we're really doing is setting the table. This criteria sets the table for us as what meal will be served, when it comes to a vote. Just to use a easy analogy here, okay?
So 2, 3, and...
Yep.
Yeah, 2, 3, and 4, CAC and staff are the same. The
Correct.
only one that's different is 7. Staff has CAC and TAC are the same. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir. Andy?
just a suggestion, but maybe we take these in blocks and just work through 2, 3, and 4, which are criterion 2, mobility for auto and freight, criterion 3, mobility for transit, and criterion 4, mobility for non-motorized. In these, the TAC differed from the CAC and staff. And the issue is on negative scoring for these. So taking those as a block, then we can move on to the others.
Any motions appropriate, Andy?
Oh, that was scary.
Of course, they'll be voted on, but any motions appropriate.
Okay, so this would be kind of like a sub-motion for the
Well, so
package.
what we're doing is by a motion, you're building the main motion to follow.
Building the main motion. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion that we accept on criterions 2, 3, and 4, the recommendations of TAC and, CAC and staff,
So the motion,
which puts negative scoring in each one of these.
okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, TAC
TAC
will
did
go
not.
along with this. Good.
Okay.
That makes it easy for us.
So that would mean that okay, so the motion on the floor, is there a second to that motion?
I second it.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to accept the CAC recommendation on criterion 2, 3, and 4. Any discussion on that? All right, we'll take a vote on those. All those in favor of that motion, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Okay. We now are, I think, agreement on 1, 2, 3,
4.
well,
Everything
one,
but 5 and 7.
yes,
1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. All right.
2, 3, 4. 5 and 7 are still discussion. What we're doing is forming the motion for a final motion for a final vote on the total criteria.
Okay, on criteria,
5 is transit connectivity and accessibility, and 7 is modal integration and ADA accessibility.
I make a motion on criteria 5 and 7 that we adopt the TAC recommendations.
Okay, we have a motion to accept the TAC and CAC are in
Well,
agreement.
they're the same.
On 5 and 7.
Right.
Is there a second? Without a second, the motion fails.
Okay, I'm not making a second. I'm just
Okay.
a comment or discussion point, which is in here, the CAC and the TAC did not recommend negative scoring,
Correct.
and the staff did, which is a
Correct.
shift from the others.
That's correct.
So on these two, CAC and staff, or CAC and TAC, why did you not want to have a negative scoring in these where you did on the others?
Good question.
Chair from either one want to come up? Ryan or Jim?
I'll just repeat what several of us had said, that we just felt that none of us member governments would submit projects that would be bad projects, that would have negative scores. So that was the rationale for both criteria 5 and 7.
Yes, I kind of misstated my question because the TAC is actually consistent in these. It was CAC that shifted. So SAC recommended negative scoring before and did not in this time, so maybe that's a question more for the CAC.
And I want to put a finer point on what you just said. Is it, Mark Waller, is the issue that you would never submit something that would be a bad project, or is it that you would never submit something that would garner a negative score based on this review criteria? I think those are very different things.
Well, most of the members of the TAC agree that we would not submit bad projects. So, I mean, there is a good argument for both sides.
Define bad project for me, please.
A project that has a negative score. It is.
Love the circularness of that argument.
That does not impact other projects and is consistent with all the other criteria.
The way I see it here, because I feel like we're going in a little bit of a circle, the way I see it here, it's not a bad project or a project that's going to garner a negative score. It's a project that's going to reduce ridership in some way. Is that fair?
In that case, yeah, I would never submit a project that would reduce ridership.
But is that how we're defining bad project?
These are 12 criteria. Well, there are more than 12 criteria. So
Well, there are 12. Yeah. So we may get dinged on a criteria or two, but we may have, positive, good scores for the other. So it is a balancing act spread among all those 12 criteria.
But let me just ask, if there were another project that was going to hurt ridership, you'd want to know about that. You'd want that because you're defending transit. You'd want a project to score low that hurts your ridership purpose. Why would why would mobility not be in favor of a negative scoring for something that would hurt mobility?
Well, for mobility, I mean, you just approved consistent scoring criteria for 2, 3, and 4. So all modes will be treated equally. So there's no difference there. We didn't go with negative scores on one and positive scores on the other. So that's good. Criteria 5 and 7, the only two outliers here. I mean, again, the benefit of us being involved in the criteria development process is, we're going to be writing our projects based on how they're going to score. That's going to inform us. So we're going to know where we benefit on some of these criteria and where we don't. But that's also going to factor into the projects that we submit. If we have a project that doesn't do well on several of the criteria, we'll probably reconsider whether we submit those projects. But it is a balance, and like I said, and this has been the case for several planning cycles. Some projects do well on some criteria and not too well on others, but in the end, it all kind of balances out, and the best projects rise to the top.
Thank you. I guess it seems to me the issue isn't negative or positive scoring criteria. It's how we define the negative or positive scoring criteria. Like, so who determines, looking at the staff recommendation here on criteria number 7, a -9 would be creates or adds 3 missing link barrier types, including ADA. Who determines what -9 means?
In this case, staff did.
Okay, so staff came up with that. So you're never going to submit a project that has 3 missing links in it, right?
It's very unlikely. Because we would
why
get
would you
dinged on
do
this
that?
one.
When the mission is to
Right.
increase accessibility. So in my mind, the issue isn't that there's a negative scoring criteria, it's that the negative scoring criteria is defined incorrectly. That the negative scoring criteria should perhaps be 0. Instead of taking away 3 links of accessibility, a -9 should perhaps be it doesn't add any accessibility. And that helps keep everything consistent in terms of scoring criteria and has a definition that will maybe at some point have some sort of negative scoring criteria, because I'm guessing you are going to submit a project that doesn't expand the number of linkages. Certainly you're not going to submit one that takes them away. So I don't. To me, it's again, and I'm done. It's not the negative numbers, it's what they represent. Am I missing something?
So are you saying yes to my motion? Are you seconding my motion not to have negative numbers?
No.
No, okay.
Jim, go ahead.
Can I support my friend Brian?
We're all friends here. That's why we call it council.
Jim Moore with the CAC. This conversation is very familiar. It is a lot like what we went through with the CAC, and I would remind the members of the board that the CAC's not the technical evaluating committee. We try to bring a more macro community perspective, and that will be reflected in the fact that we are the committee that does the weighting. And if you want to see some blank expressions, when we started talking about that last month, that got strange. But I think it's important to realize we listened to the TAC representatives in our meeting, listened to their discussion from their point of view, and we do have a couple of project people who are on the CAC who were able to shed more of the community perspective on what the TAC was telling us. And so our recommendation, which is basically what you all just considered part of, our recommendation to adopt the rest of the TAC recommendation is based upon, I don't want to say it's their smooth talk, but is based upon what we felt was a strong logic representing that technical perspective. So we elected to honor that, and it did take us a while to figure out what it was we wanted to do. That motion that is one sentence in our report this month reflects about 3 different efforts before we got to that. So that's where we came from. I've given you some more background and be happy, but I really appreciate the TAC accepting the notion that we reflected on that, and it's a good compromise. I think it's a good compromise overall. And at the end of the day, it's a tool. It is a tool for staff, and we're all still going to get a chance to see the scored out projects when they come around. So that'll be the final step that really is the important one.
Yeah, and that said, I'd like to hear from staff again in this regard. Clearly, the TAC agreed with CAC and staff on the last 5 issues. Tell me how this doesn't work for staff.
Brian
You explained it once, but give me one more shot at it.
No, Brian's comment that the project applicants do use the scoring criteria, and we want them to, in evaluating, kind of doing a self-evaluation of their projects. So if they've got 2 projects and one score is higher than the other, we would hope that they submit the higher scoring project. We're trying to encourage the best projects. Now, what's happened with the criteria, with the targets that the board developed this year and the objectives, is you put a higher emphasis on the non-auto modes of travel, on transit and on non-motorized. And so we have elevated the profile of those modes within the criteria this time because of that, because of what the board developed. We, TAC or staff, and we have accepted and agreed with 4 of the recommendations that TAC made before it came to you. We agreed with 3 of the CAC recommendations, and certainly agree with their philosophy that negative scores should be applied, and corrected some of our own oversight on that issue. And so that's why in some cases we appear to be standing alone out here with negatives, is because we went ahead for consistency and applied them across the board. I agree with Commissioner Waller. We may never use a negative score on any particular criteria. I can't believe that transit or trails or sidewalk project would come forward and say, we want to rip sidewalks out. But I can see adding 2 lanes to a road and making it a freeway and doing nothing for pedestrians that want to cross that road. That would be a lesser of a project than one that identified how it's going to let pedestrians cross a road where they used to be able to, but now they can't because it's a freeway. You know, there's going to be 1, 2, 3 pedestrian overpasses or something, and we're encouraging that to be identified in the application so that we know that it's being considered and being approved rather than just being not mentioned and as an oversight or is it forgotten. Now, we don't have designs, and we're not going to have designs for these projects. This is something we're looking for 20 years out, so we're not expecting designs, but there should be a concept of what's desired.
This is for 2045.
Just one last.
Question, go ahead. Mark.
One last. Help me understand what would be wrong with applying the negative scoring criteria to the recommendations by the TAC in 5 and 7. So, for example, where the TAC recommendation says 0, completes or removes 0 missing links or barrier types, why can't that be -9? And in criteria 7, and the +9 completes, removes 3 missing links or barriers be the +9, and then everything else in between, you know, getting to 0 to, that way you have the TAC criteria, but you have a standardized scoring system. And maybe there's something wrong with that, I don't know, but
That's what staff wants.
no, that's not on criteria 7, because staff wants.
In criterion 7, the 0 score under the TAC and CAC recommendation is you complete or remove nothing, so it's kind of not applicable, or you create a barrier.
No, I get it.
That's what it says.
But it appears to me that everywhere that staff recommendations are different from TAC and CAC, that staff basically wants -9 through +9, and for everything, for consistency. And I get that, I understand it. And if you look through all 12 of these, it's pretty much that's the way it goes.
Yes.
So,
But
it's consistency. They just want, I believe staff just wants consistency for -9 to +9 on pretty much everything.
But your motion, Sharon, is that you accept the TAC CAC over the objection of staff.
I understand that. I mean, I know. I understand what I mean. I'm just answering his comment.
Well, I
If I
don't
may.
think you are quite understanding what I'm saying, and I apologize if I'm not explaining it correctly.
Okay, I've heard that many times.
Staff's recommendation.
Doesn't mean that you're not explaining it.
No, staff's recommendation is that a -9 represents something different than what 0 represents for the TAC recommendation. And what I'm saying is, why can't we say the -9 represents what the TAC recommendation is, so not what the staff recommendation is, but what the TAC recommendation is, and then create the scale from there. That's where I'm coming from.
If I may.
And I don't know that that's correct. I'm just asking the question.
Andy, go ahead.
Okay, focusing on criterion 7, modal integration, ADA accessibility. The TAC and CAC and staff actually agree from 0 down. Their criteria are all the same. The only difference is that the staff adds the 3 negative scoring. So these recommendations are all actually very, very close. And what I don't understand is, and in this case, why the CAC shifted. They said they kind of accepted the TAC recommendation, but I'm kind of, in this particular case, looking at the staff recommendation because it is consistent, and it doesn't change any of the scoring that the CAC and the TAC recommended.
Except that they won't submit a proposal that has any of the negative criteria.
Well, I'm sure they
what
wouldn't.
they're saying.
Yeah, I'm sure they wouldn't, but then it goes back to the earlier conversation that someone else may have a different project in there that negatively impacts these aspects, and that's what it is, or that's what their point is. And my point here is that the TAC, CAC, and staff actually agree on most of these things. The staff just adds a few more. So I'm kind of inclined to push, in this case, to accept the staff recommendation, because it doesn't change what CAC and TAC did. It just adds a few more negative criteria.
Okay, Ken?
Commissioner, in response to your question, could the zero under tax recommendation be the -9? The way it's written is if you complete or remove no missing links, it's, in other words, it's not applicable. You paint a bike lane stripe on a road. It doesn't remove anything, doesn't add anything, it's not applicable, it would get a -9 under your proposal.
Well, that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah.
And,
But maybe from a mobility perspective, maybe from an ADA perspective, that's appropriate. I mean, because we want to do things that are more ADA friendly. We don't want to keep doing the same thing. So that's why we rip sidewalks out and put in better accessible sidewalks that way. The status quo shouldn't be a 0. The status quo is we're not being ADA compliant. That there should be a negative number associated with that in my mind, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, if the status quo is ADA compliant and you're not really changing anything, why would you assign a negative score?
Because the status quo isn't ADA compliant.
The status quo is ADA compliant in a lot of cases. If you're making a 0 change, why would you assign that as a negative?
Yeah, because we can do much better than.
Because we can do better than status quo, but if the status quo is
Andy,
ADA compliant.
It's not always status quo, Andy.
I know.
It's not.
I know, it's not.
Is having sidewalks that you have to step down off of status quo? It is, yes. Is it right? Is it ADA compliant? No.
But a lot of our places are ADA. My point is, if you put it into something, if the place is ADA compliant and you don't change it, that's 0 missing links. That's a 0 criteria. Why would you assign a negative?
Be consistent.
And just to be consistent, I agree with your point that we need to do better. But the issue on this one is that we can't get federal funds for a project that we don't do ADA improvements on. So you literally can't not fix that sidewalk and not put the ped ramp in there. It's just against the law. So that was why we went from 0 to 9.
But what if the ramp is already there, is my point. A lot of places are ADA compliant.
Yes, but
already.
and if
so
you're
why
going
would
to
you
then,
why would you then negatively score something?
Oh, based on that
which
makes
is
sense.
why we went from 0 to 9 and not
Why-
use the negatives. That helps.
Okay.
You buy that? Okay, then I'll make a motion.
On 5, well, we have a motion on the floor from,
But it failed for lack of second.
we have no, that's correct. We have no second to that motion, so we'll let them go. Your motion on the floor, sir.
My motion on the floor for criterion 7, modal integration ADA accessibility, only 7 at this point, is to accept the staff recommendation.
Yes, I think we only need 7. 1, 2, yes, we still have a quorum. Okay, we have a motion is second to that motion to accept the staff recommendation on criteria 7. Is there a second?
Yes.
We have a second. Any further discussion on that motion? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay?
Nay.
Okay,
Okay.
motion passes. We're building a primary motion, so we have just criteria 7, which has some, criteria 5, transit connectivity.
I was the nay. If she needs to get back there.
Okay. We have just criterion 5 to fill in the final motion here.
Okay, without making a motion
Okay.
yet.
Okay, go ahead.
This has the same issue here, whereas TAC and CAC and staff all have the same recommendation on the same criteria. And the only difference here, again, is that the staff adds negative scoring with additional negative comments. So
So the logic that you used
the
for
logic
7
is the same at this point.
Between 5 and
I'll-
7.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and make the motion that we accept the staff recommendation for criterion 5, transit connectivity and accessibility.
Okay, is there a second of that? Okay, we have motion and a second on criteria 5 to accept staff recommendation on criteria 5. All those in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Opposed, nay? The motion once again passes. Okay, I think we now, if I've been following this, we have constructed a final motion. Let me pose this motion and let somebody on the board make it. But proposed motion then, on the criteria is on criteria 1, all in agreement, to accept the recommendation of all three. Criteria 2, to accept the recommendation of CAC and staff. Criteria 3, to accept the recommendation of CAC and staff. Criteria 4, to accept the recommendation of CAC and staff. Criteria 5, to accept the staff recommendation. Criteria 6, unanimous recommendation to accept all three. And criteria 7, to accept the staff recommendation. That is a proposed motion. Anybody wish to make that motion? Oh, excuse me, 8, unanimously on to accept the unanimous recommendation. That is a proposed motion. Ken, any?
Well, I'll wait for you to get a motion in a second. I do want to highlight something.
So moved.
Wait, he
Oh.
only got to 9.
Oh, you only got to 9, I'm sorry.
8, 9, and 10, and 11, and 12 are
12.
all in agreement for a consolidated recommendation. Okay. Is that-
So moved.
All right. A motion to accept those as developed. Is there a second to the motion?
There's a second, yes.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion on that package?
I do have one, please, on page 8, the infill criterion. There is a description there of the connecting roads, and if you remember, in our infill target, we identified the 2015 employment and population density and created the blue polygon map that was in your handout. But in the criteria, we've identified the connecting roads out to Schriever, up to Falcon, out to Woodland Park, and up to Monument up north. And in the description, it says Curtis Road from Bradley to Highway 94. That should be changed from Bradley to Judge Orr Road to the north. And then add Judge Orr Road from Curtis west to US 24. So it makes that northern connection up to the Falcon area. And that should be part of the description here.
And just to recap, we had discussion, I think, 2 meetings ago that when we concentrate on infill, what to include the routes that connect infill areas. So our military bases, when we improve transportation in and around the military base, we also want to include the route that connects to the military base in the infill scoring. So that's the point.
This defines those connecting routes.
You're wanting us to amend the motion.
So amended.
Yes, to include that, please.
Okay, so amended, okay. Okay.
And we thank you for that change.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for your forbearance. Any other questions? We have a motion, a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? All right, Ken, thank you for your
Thank you very
forbearance.
much.
Lengthy process, almost an hour to get through that, but I think we're going to have a much better process to get recommendations from our committees. Okay. Thank you very much. That completes our action items. We want an information item, small area forecast update. Jennifer, looks like moving towards the podium.
I probably don't need it. Okay, Jennifer Valentine. I'm a transportation planner with PPACG. So it's been a couple of months since I provided an update on small area forecast activities, and so I just wanted to let you all know what we've been up to and what you can expect over the next couple of months. So fortunately, we are still on schedule. So in your memo, I've outlined steps 1 through 8, and that's roughly our schedule for the last few months and the next few months. Right now, we are exactly between steps 3 and 4. So we have finished.
Jennifer?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Chair, but when you say 1 through 8, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Sure. In the memo, I outlined, so each step has a brief description of the activity and a planned time frame.
That again tells me nothing.
Okay,
But
yeah,
Can you just tell me what I don't know, just the highlight, the subject? You
Sure.
know, I'm just hearing numbers, but like I did earlier with 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7, it's just like, and Andy's been reading them to me, but I just hear numbers that has no connection to anything. I kind of wish that everybody would be blindfolded just for like 30 minutes of a meeting so that, you know, you could just be a little more descriptive. I'm not asking for everything because I know it'll take forever, but just so that I can connect what I've read to what you're saying.
Yeah, no problem. So at this time, I'll briefly go through those steps 1 through 8. So step 1 was towards the end of last year. It was November and December of 2017. And that's when we were really just doing a lot of the work in Urban Sim, doing the simulation runs, testing the model, trying to break the model, working with our consultant who's developing the program itself. So step 2 was when we first started sharing those simulation results with the land use planners from our member governments, and that was the end of January and really mostly the first week of February. We had all of those individual meetings. So since then, step 3, we've really just been refining the model to reflect the different types of feedback we received from our member governments from those land use planners. A lot of it has focused on adding additional development projects to the model to try and make it more accurate, looking at our inputs like our zoning layer. So as I said, right now we're just past that. We finished putting in all of those new inputs, and we're about to do another set of simulation runs in Urban Sim. I'm just waiting on one thing from our consultants before I press the button and make those run. So step 4 is when we start sharing our simulation results with what we're calling our Delphi committee. It's a small team of regional economic experts who have agreed to provide high-level review and oversight of our model results, and we'll be doing that towards the middle or the end of this month. So step 5 will be, once again, refining the model based on what we hear from those regional economic experts, and we're hoping that'll be towards the end of March or the beginning of April. Step 6, and at the same time we start sharing those results with the regional economic experts, we are going to give our committees sort of a sneak peek preview of those results. We want them to have as much time as possible to take a look at it because it is pretty technical and involved information. So step 6 is when we formally start presenting those results to the TAC and the CAC, and that's towards the end, or actually most of April of this year. Step 7 is when we continue discussing the results with the TAC and the CAC. We move from information items to discussion and start getting closer to motions. And then at that time, we'll also start sharing some of the results with the board as an information or discussion item, again, because we know you're going to need more than a month to go over the small area forecast results. And then step 8 is a formal presentation of the results to the committees and the board, hopefully for recommendation and approval. And we're looking to do that in July. So the small area forecast needs to be on roughly the same time schedule as our call for projects, mostly related to that infill item we just talked about. So we will be scoring all of our projects under all 3 of the land use scenarios we've been talking about. And one of those components is we have 3 different small area forecasts for infill, new centers, and dispersed development. So projects will score differently depending on whether they're in that infill boundary or that new centers boundary or the dispersed boundary or outside of all 3 of those. So we need to have this wrapped up in July. So that's pretty much the overview. Like I said, we're going to be starting to share results with our committees and with you all in the next couple of months, but we have just a little bit more technical work to do before it's kind of ready.
This is the hard task. This is describing what our metro area, Pikes Peak region, will look like in 2045. That's what this model does. So this is describing the environment, which our transportation structure, the project we just talked about scoring, how it's going to fit and serve the population that we expect over the next 20 years.
Right, and it's really the basis of our decisions for what transportation infrastructure investments do we need and where, depending on where we think the people and the jobs are going to be. So it's pretty important.
Yeah. Any
Thank
questions
you, Jennifer.
Yeah, no problem. And anytime there's something like that, please feel free to point it out because we do forget sometimes.
I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Any question for Jennifer? Thank you very much.
Sure.
All right. Item 7B. 7A, military installation points. Gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Who'd like to start? Al?
Sure, I'd love to start.
Thank you.
Fort Carson, a couple things just this morning. Last time I mentioned that very busy at Carson. Just an update, 2nd Brigade, our infantry brigade, has deployed. About 2,000 of the 4,000 plus soldiers actually deployed based on force caps overseas. And The first Stryker Brigade this next month will start deploying, so that'll be the 2nd Brigade gone from Carson. The Combat Aviation Brigade has a number of deployed missions this summer that they'll get ready to start leaving on. And the division headquarters has been involved over the last week, going into this week, in a very intense command post exercise, so they've been busy there as well. The only other thing I'd like to mention this morning is about fires at Carson. We've made the news, not in a good way, over the last couple weeks. Had the fire out by the golf course here 2 weeks ago. That obviously, with the help of the community through mutual aid agreements, was very aggressively contained. We ended up moving some folks out of some buildings there and some family housing while that was ongoing. But again, appreciate the support of the community. And then this past Thursday evening, a fire started down in one of our range areas, kind of towards the south center area of our training lands, towards Pueblo West. Went into Friday, Saturday, and then some on Sunday. We again, actually in this particular case, it actually was burning in a good area for us because we needed some kind of mitigation down there around some of our ranges. So it actually helped us over time here to do some mitigation in an area we were going to have to mitigate anyways. So again, appreciate the community's support on that. We did get support across the community with some brush truck assets and people to help fight the fire. So that's the update this morning. Any questions for Carson?
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Colonel Sett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the PPACG leadership and the public attendees. John Usett, 21st Space Wing, Peterson Air Force Base. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to provide our update this month, and as part of our update, we'd like to brief you on the aspects of the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act process regarding the PFOS and PFOA at Peterson Air Force Base. As we briefed yesterday at the Fountain City Council meeting, we were in the middle of the expanded site inspection at Peterson. The transect testing came back in late February to identify the best placement of additional monitoring wells. We have a meeting scheduled on the 27th of March to present the data to the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment and select the well locations so they can be installed in May of 2018. The results of the test were 59 direct push technology points were identified and tested. 29 of those points had water in them. The remaining 30 did not. 20 potential well sites identified for discussion with the CDPHE placement. The test results were nominal based on the fire training area location. And this year, we anticipate the completion of the expanded site inspection and will have a final report published for public release. The work plan for a new contract with the United States Geological Survey is due this spring. They will collect additional groundwater due to feed into the current groundwater model for the Widefield aquifer. Several wells will be fitted with continuous read water level indicators so we can see the real-time impact of storm events. The Fountain Security and Widefield's water purveyors are in the process with the Air Force Civil Engineering Center to complete their environmental service agreements. We anticipate the Fountain ESA to be signed by the Air Force this week. We are also working on their engineering evaluation and cost analysis, also known as ECA. It is our understanding that the ECA process is facilitating a longer-term solution. Fountain is working their 4-well solution, Security a 24-well solution, and Widefield a 10-well solution. This will be a longer process dependent on the passing of the NDAA and the federal budget. At this stage in the CER-CLA process, we believe that effective forums for information flow, community involvement, and discourse have been established. Community town halls, quarterly Fountain City Council public meetings, monthly PPACG updates such as this, and media updates with our Peterson representatives in attendance are sufficiently attended. We believe our state partners and the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry are supportive and maintain similar viewpoints due to the number of workshop and community forums they provide as well. Our installation continues to reassess the need for a restorative advisory board as the Air Force advances through the CER-CLA process and efforts to address the PFAS and PFOA contamination develop. Yes, ma'am.
You know, the sad thing is I understood everything you said.
Yeah.
and all the acronyms. They did have a new one for us last night. They had a new acronym, so we have to learn that one now. But I would like to say again publicly, I said it last night at the council meeting, we feel like we are miles and miles ahead of where we were 6 to 9 months ago in terms of communication to the community and the citizens in the area, and we really appreciate that. We appreciate Representative Landgraf, Representative Doug Lamborn, and the 2 senators, Bennett and Gardner, and everything they've done, keeping everything open. That's really appreciative, and we think we're really moving forward. And I appreciate Colonel Dormandy coming down quarterly and the Air Force coming down quarterly and the reports we're receiving. I think they're excellent, and I think you guys have come a long way in terms of learning to put it in down to real citizen, terminology. I knew he used a lot of terminology today, but in the meetings they're really taking time to explain it. We really, really appreciate that. And we're just thrilled that the MOU is so close to being done. I know Colonel Dormandy was really hoping to have it yesterday to hand out at the council meeting, but that's the way it goes. But thank you so much for your communication. And, all the utilities have Facebook pages with this on there, and everything's on the web pages, so this information is out there for the citizens. So thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So a couple of other items for our update this month. So we've got a new proposal for outside of our north gate. We're for a traffic circle. We're in coordination with the developer, CDOT, in the city and the county. Primarily brief for PPACG awareness at this stage. Additionally, for our off-base signage, our civil engineering staff is currently coordinating with CDOT, the county, and the city to update and place signage on the roadways around the installation that properly identify, gate name, direction, commercial delivery, things of that nature. Additionally, and finally, we appreciate the quick response by the city on the Peterson requested adjustments to the new traffic lights at the Stewart and Airport intersection. So, any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, just going back to the PFOA thing, you mentioned you had some testing results from some of the wells, and you said they were nominal, meaning it was within limits?
That is my understanding, yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
What we would expect with contaminated site.
Okay.
What you'd...
Okay.
I couldn't quite hear through the pillar there. What did he say?
Okay, so they are what within the limits that we would expect for a contaminated site. The numbers will be released later, sure.
Okay, that tells me that's still contaminated. Yeah, it's contaminated. Correct. All right, okay. And I'll pass on the thanks for the
The water
traffic.
coming out from the utilities is not contaminated.
Water coming
Out from the utilities.
That
is
I
not
very well understood.
I
Yes.
want to make sure that word is out there. Okay. And the interesting thing was, I asked them to define wells last night, and they are not going to drill down a well like you and I think of a residential well going down. It's going to be more of a, and the depth will depend on where the contamination is found, but then so they can collect the stormwater as it kind of flows through this and isn't static in a well, because that's what they're trying to determine is how it's still flowing. So.
And we'll have a moment. Let me recognize Annie Oatman Gardner from Senator Bennett's office. He is here this morning. So thank you for coming, Annie. Anything else?
No, sir. Thank you.
All right. Colonel Mulder, welcome.
Good to be here, sir. So, Jake Middleton from Schrieber Air Force Base. I don't have a whole lot today, but on Friday I will point out that we have, and I know you were talking acronyms here, so I'll walk you through a few of those. We got a new satellite mission coming on Friday if everything goes well. It's ORS-5, Operational Responsive Space 5. So the ORS part is not very descriptive, but it is the fifth DoD mission. Operational Responsive Space is just a way for us to get satellite launched and in space and operational quicker. This particular mission is a space situational awareness mission. I actually flew ORS-1, so I guess I'm getting a little old. The other thing I want to just make sure everybody was aware, the base did support, I think there was a fire in the local area and a couple accidents. I didn't realize that a couple of years ago we actually needed agreement to actually leave the base and support. It seems like that would be common sense to me, but we were able to do that, so that was a good thing. And with the new mission, the base overall is growing, as you know, so my bosses, all of my bosses, the biggest effort there is to make sure we think ahead and do that smartly, so between the base, the community, and the mission that we have, that transition is smooth. The good thing about it is that we're only expecting, a few hundred every year, so it's not talking a very massive increase. Even though when you look at the long-term numbers, they are pretty large. But I tend to focus on the numbers within the year, like a year or two, because they seem to be more accurate than the long-term numbers. Any questions?
So over the long term, what's our expected growth from Schriever over 5-10 years?
I'm afraid to give the number. I'll tell you what I've heard.
Okay.
So the way it works is, the reason why I focus on the short-term numbers is they actually come with funding and authorizations to do things. So those are in the hundreds. But I'll say this. So over the long term, I've heard, multiple thousands.
Okay. Something we need to get ready for, obviously. We as a region, not
That's
just,
correct. So
not
I
just
will
the
I
base.
will caveat. I agree. I will caveat. The NSDC is there in place. They are growing, but there's the other part. The Joint Forces Space Component Command, which is still kind of in the works. Milcon still needs to be determined. Schriever, I believe, still needs to be determined as a site. However, everything is moving ahead like it is Schriever, so I have no reason to believe it's not. But to your point, I think planning and getting this right is a smart thing to do.
And I would hope that outside these meetings, that the base would be very closely engaged with our director and staff here to help that process along. Help
Yes,
us
sir.
support that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you. Nothing much. Any questions for Peterson? Excuse me, for Schriever, Harvard Schriever? Air Force Academy.
That's not me. Dave Kincaid from the Air Force Academy. A few things going on. The Tri-Bridge intersection construction is still going on, so traffic is moving slow in the mornings, especially going into Air Academy High School, especially there. And there'll be single lane closures, so there'll be one lane traffic if anybody's coming on base during the evenings. We did have a meeting with La Plata discussing the farm development, and we also did a site visit to kind of look at some of the stormwater mitigation they've done out there. We're going to readdress our concerns at an upcoming council meeting, I think in April, early April. And they've done quite a bit. We're still concerned with some of the downrange stormwater impacts because everything kind of stops at the fence line, and the impact is really what's happening on USAFA property. So we'll have some more discussions about that, but really productive engagement with them. And the other thing is we had an email from Commissioner Glenn. A concerned citizen was talking about a lot of the garbage. If you're going up South Academy or you're going up North Academy right there where it enters the base over near the La Quinta and the McDonald's and where kind of the homeless camps are, there's a lot of garbage up there. So we have discussed that and some ways to possibly make that area less attractive by thinning out some of the trees in some different areas. But we realize it's a problem. A lot of that's not on our property, so it kind of limits some of the things we can do there. But we are looking at ways to help mitigate the impact of some of the homeless camps there, both on the city and on USAFA. And the State of USAFA address by the superintendent is going to be on the 6th of April.
Any questions for Colonel Kincaid? Thank you, gentlemen. Move on then to Mobility Coordinating Committee, our internal reports. Gail Nels.
Good morning, Gail Nels with AMBLCAB and Mobility Coordinating Committee Chair. Really not too much to add to what you see in the minutes in front of you, but a little bit of a caveat or more information. And we're a little bit more collaborative in our deliberations, how we define things and how we're moving forward. But we're asking Mountain Metro to help us understand some of the decisions that are being made. And one that came out was as the budget for city transit was increased to 1.7 million, we also noted that, or Craig Blewett noted that ridership has been fairly flat, and the dollars will be allocated to higher frequency and things like that in order to hopefully drive up some ridership. But for those of us in the human services provider arena, our ridership is growing, yet our allocations have been flat for the last 5 years. So we thought we should have a little bit more discussion about what the decisions are being made, and not to say that these are the wrong decisions, but to be a little bit more forthcoming. I mean, not to say no one's transparent, but we need to acknowledge the decisions that are being made in a more open manner at these meetings that we host monthly. Another fact I wanted to kind of point out was CDOT has also funded mobility management in some rural counties. And one of them, that's important here to us, is Teller. And I'm not quite sure what CDOT is trying to tell us, because we have a mobility management here within El Paso County, really just residing within Mountain Metro Transit. And so I think we'll be looking at what that function is within the city of Colorado Springs and how we can work together better with Teller and other rural communities. So any other questions for me about what we're doing? Or thank you.
Thank you, Teller. Okay, Transportation Advisory, Brian.
Good morning, Brian Vitulli, City of Colorado Springs, Mountain Metro Transit, and Chair of the TAC. Reports from both of our meetings on February 15th and the 22nd are in your packet. I'd be glad to answer any questions you have. Okay, thank you.
Community Advisory Committee, Jim Moore.
Jim Moore, First Vice Chair for the CAC. You have our report. I think you've seen me enough. I'd be willing to address any questions you might have.
Thank you, Jim. Good job. Dave Betzler from the RAC. Morning, David.
Good morning, Dave Betzler, Chair of the Regional Advisory Council. You've got our minutes before you. The only thing I'd add, and thankfully you also approved the membership changes in the consent part of today's agenda. Also just note that the senior day at the Capitol is on the 21st next week, so just want to make that announcement. Happy to answer any questions.
Anybody? Thank you very much, David. Okay, CDOT monthly update.
Dave Watt, resident engineer with CDOT Region 2. I'm not sure I can be as brief as the CAC chairman, but I will work on it. Commissioner Scott had to go to the High Performance Tolling Enterprise meeting. He extended his apologies, but I think the board had some very good dialogue and discussions about the GAP project, and I'll go ahead and update about some of the upcoming projects. The I-25 Rock Rim and Bridge Preventive Maintenance Project is underway. That's beginning with Wadsworth Construction. That's approximately $8.3 million effort to do some bridge preventive maintenance work on the bridge decks themselves at the Rock Rim and North Nevada Avenue interchange, some pavement preventive maintenance, and address some of the ride quality issues we've got there. So we're excited about that. That's going to be about a year-long effort. It should be complete by the middle of December of 2018. Look for some traffic switches coming up where we're going to move folks out to the outside, and then upcoming months we will be able to keep 3-lane configuration, but you're going to see some traffic shifts upcoming as we shift the work around to allow workspace to repair and replace expansion devices, and again address some bridge preventive maintenance work and smooth out that ride. March 29th, one of our upcoming advertisement dates for projects. We've got an I-25 cable rail project that should go out to add. That will be approximately 5 miles of cable rail in between Mountain and Pueblo, kind of piggybacking on some of the work that we did last summer. That should be moving forward. I think that's going to be about a $3 million effort. US 24, I'll extend our acknowledgement to Teller County, Woodland Park, Manitou Springs, and El Paso County. It's going to be a busy next few months. along US 24 West. We've got the 31st Street and Ridge Road intersection improvement projects that will be going out March 29th as well. US 24 Rockfall project should be going out for advertisement tomorrow. That will be in the Canyon effort. That's about a $2.5 million effort there to remove some rock structures, if you will, or formations, and provide some enhanced safety to mitigate rockfall potential. Recall back the 2015 flood event we had. We've got 3 permanent repairs that are about to be awarded and start construction. 2 of those are on State Highway 115. One of those is adjacent to the monastery wall on US 24. And so that's just a little bit to the east of Cascade, but that will be some work along Fountain Creek and stabilizing the rock wall that was flooded out in the 2015 event. We've also got some good news when it comes to the fiber optic line that we've been in discussions with Teller County, Woodland Park, and El Paso County. The state has another $18 million, so on a statewide basis, that's going out. That's going to allow us to move forward with the advertisement of extending the fiber optic line from roughly, I'll say, Manitou Springs all the way up to Woodland Park. And we're looking forward to some partnership with El Paso County. We've had a lot of good coordination with their IT department, and I think there's going to be some additional conduit provided there by El Paso County to kind of piggyback on the efforts as we trench through Highway 24 there and extend that fiber optic service up there. So that's a recent development. That's a project that will be moving forward. It won't be advertised in the next month, but I would anticipate in the next 2 to 3 months that we'll go out to advertise it. So we'll
Is this Tom Rivera still managing that project? I heard there may have been a change.
He's still managing that program. Jill Scott is his project manager, and she's been on the case, so to speak.
Okay, and some partnerships involved also. I don't have to mention them, but appreciate your opening up a discussion to both commercial and government partners.
That's Tom Rivera's group has been leading that effort, you bet.
And Dave, the projected completion date on the fiber?
I would say by the end of summer.
Thank you.
If that varies, I'll let you know.
Thank you.
Talking about Will Micro, I mean, I think still 4 inches wide, 18 inches deep, micro, right? Yeah.
That's my understanding. They deal in different terminology than they allow us, some of the civil engineering group to do. But it's good stuff, and it's been a good partnership moving forward. My last item, piggybacking on Schriever Air Force Base's comments, we had a very, I think, productive meeting that was sponsored by El Paso County in regards to some of the changes that are coming up near term about growth out at Schriever Air Force Base and what we may need to do with State Highway 94 to accommodate that near-term growth and the potential or likelihood for additional growth on the Air Force Base. So we heard from the wing commander, we heard from a couple county commissioners, and able to pass on that we have located a couple $100,000 to begin initial studies on Highway 94 and look at some of the traffic impacts we have currently and roll out some scenarios based on new mission requirements, anticipated growth at Schriever, and what might be the next steps for Highway 94, if those are going to be capacity improvements or more near-term spot improvements we can make to help provide for the needs of Schriever Air Force Base and the traveling community out there. There's a lot going on out there in eastern El Paso County, not only with Schriever, but growth to the east of Schriever, and whether or not Bang Lewis Ranch is going to be developing as well. So that certainly involves PPACG as we look at what are the upcoming needs on Highway 94. But that's a study that'll start in about a month, maybe a 6-month window for that, and I'm sure we'll be reporting back here in addition to the stakeholders we visited with. But if there's any questions.
Questions for Dave?
Thanks, Dave.
Great. Ben? Sharon? Dave? Maybe one.
Just on the I-25 cables, I appreciate you guys meeting with the group of citizens down there. I know they met with some of them. But is any of that going to be done at night? Because when you installed it right below the 128 bridge, it was for months, the traffic was backed up, and it was...
We're doing that work at night.
You're doing that work at night. Oh, thank you so much.
Okay, nearing the end here. just in interest of time, the STAC, Statewide Transportation Advisory Committee, met on February 23rd. Andy and I were both in attendance, and others. Andy Gunning was there as well, and introduced him to all of our friends up in Denver. I think really well received. That was kind of an important part.
Exciting, yes.
So just maybe some highlights. It's hard to condense a 3-hour meeting into a few comments, but one that was kind of got everybody's attention was the state of Colorado is considering hosting either the 2030 or 2034 Winter Olympics in the state of Colorado. Selection will be made in September of 2019. We expect in that Olympics 94 nations, 2,850 athletes, 7 different sports, and 102 different events. 16 venues. 13 of those venues already exist in the state of Colorado. So there'll be construction of 3 new venues. Some of the criteria are for the state of Colorado is how much of that economic impact would be positive, how much of that infrastructure once built would stay. For example, one of the things requirement is building bed space for 5,500 athletes. How much of that could perhaps address the affordable housing issues that we have in the state of Colorado? Venues would not simply be in the mountains. They could be all over the state of Colorado. Transportation infrastructure would be a key consideration. But if you'd like to participate in that discussion, 2 websites I want to refer you to. One is www.explorthegames.com. And another one is sharingthegold.org. Both places for comment, and you can see what kind of things are underway. And then, yes, sir.
Is that who we're competing against in that regard?
Salt Lake City is a key contender, yes. Yeah, of course, they hosted the Olympics in 2002. Yeah.
If you had been through there when they were building it for the Olympics, it was extraordinary.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Did they come up with or talk about any organized opposition yet?
No. Anybody? You're there as well.
I don't recall there being a whole lot of that. I mean, this is round 1 of telling anybody, so the word is just really starting to get started. And they just kind of talked about what it is. They mentioned the fact that there's probably some bad blood from having withdrawn from the Olympics after having been granted it one time way back when. And they also did mention some of the additional stuff that would have to be put out there, such as when they mentioned traffic lanes. I said, well, there's an opportunity for a 4th lane there. But there was one other point I was going to make, but it's escaping me at the moment. So.
Yep. Okay. And then
Since most everything already exists, there'd be no taxpayer involvement. It's all going to be privately funded. So that probably defuse most of the opposition.
Yeah, we do need to. That's the objective, is to move it out of the government funding stream into a private and corporate funding stream for any construction. So, then one other thing, real quickly, discussion started on performance measures target setting. The discussion we had at length this morning, imagine at a statewide level for all measures of modes, and so that discussion's underway, and I'm not even going to get into that. The next STAC meeting is on March 23rd. Of course, it's a public meeting, and Andy and Turner and I and Andy Gunning, I assume, will continue to attend those. So you're always welcome. 9 a.m. March 23rd at Seattle headquarters. Any questions on STAC? Mr. Gunning, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes. Thrilled to be here. A couple of items of business real quick I want to mention. To improve our sound system, we're getting new microphones. You may know this already. We met with the contractor yesterday, and looking back at Rick, we're thinking in the next month or 2 we might have the new system in place, so appreciate your patience in the meantime. So help is on the way in that regard. Second item I wanted to mention is, I think you realize that our environmental planning manager, program manager resigned the end of 2017. To help kind of fill the gap with some of our environmental responsibilities, we've sought a couple of proposals from environmental companies to help us coordinate an update to our water quality management plan. That's one of the main responsibilities we have as the Council of Governments. The other is in the air quality arena. But our last regional water quality plan was adopted in 2010. So it's due for an update, given the different growth projections that we have and water and sewer infrastructure needs. We really need to update that plan. So that would have been one of the main responsibilities that position would have coordinated. But we have two proposals from contractors in the state, and we're about to make a selection. Hopefully we'll identify somebody by the end of this week and get that started fairly soon. I know the Water Quality Subcommittee has been dormant for a little while, so we're going to get the band back together very soon and get that effort started. So we're excited to get that moving. Related to this, I'd like to have a broader conversation with the board, maybe when we have our retreat, and talk about the strategic plan for the board as to what our environmental needs are going forward. I don't think we have in the budget currently to fill that program manager position. But we should talk about what are our main responsibilities as far as water quality, air quality, and what are other things that the board thinks maybe we need to get involved with from an environmental standpoint. So I'm anxious to have that discussion. We're happy to talk about our long-term needs there. But just wanted to update you on that. And the last thing I want to mention, I want to thank the board, first of all, for bringing me on board. I am thrilled to be here to lead the team at PPACG. Came here by way of Maryland. For those that don't know, I was in Rockville, Maryland, back in the Washington, D.C. area for about 7 years doing local planning, most recently as their acting planning director. Before that, I was in Tucson, Arizona for about 16 years, 12 of those years working with an agency very similar to PPACG and our RTA component as well. I was with the Council of Governments and Metropolitan Planning Organization and Transportation Authority for the Tucson metropolitan area. So thrilled to be back here. I really enjoy the work that we're doing. In the 3.5 weeks I've been here, it's been a little bit of a blur, meeting tons of people, both here and out in the community with all of our member agencies and the state and other stakeholders. And really excited about what I'm hearing and the role that we could play in help getting some really good things done in the region. So excited about working with the board and working on our strategic plan this year and all the good stuff that's underway. Before I leave that, I want to thank the staff as well. We've had a great reception over the past 3.5 weeks. They're getting me up to speed with all the good stuff we're doing. They've been super accommodating and very, very supportive. And finally, I want to really recognize the help of Rick Sonnenberg. He has been a rock and really helped to get me to a point where I could hit the ground running when I got here. Even before I got here, he's been just extremely supportive, and can't thank him enough. So with that, happy to answer any questions you all may have, but still smiling. Yeah. Yep.
Anything for Andy? Very good. Okay, we'll run our member entity announcements. Anybody have?
I'd like to kind of wear a double hat for a minute. Councilmember Gabler and I met yesterday Monday, thank you, wearing our hat as the regional transit reps, and we pulled together Fountain Transit and Mountain Metro Transit heads and had a great meeting on ways we can coordinate more regionally to make sure people are getting all the way from El Paso County, whichever way they need to go, north, south, east, west, what's the best way we connect people running within two transit systems. I thought it was a very good meeting. A lot of suggestions came out of it that we can work together in some ways while still running our own unique transit system. So on that, I'm really excited. Fountain is doing two things. Number one, we started last week. We have Saturday bus transportation now. So if anybody's interested, that's something we've added in. So we'd love to help have the word spread about that. So I brought some flyers if anybody would like one. The second thing, assuming Colorado Springs, did y'all approve this yesterday? The Garden of the Gods Express? No. Okay, assuming Colorado Springs is going to
I don't think we approved that.
approve it. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and say it anyway, because we're going to assume it's going to get approved. Beginning April 4th, we're going to be running a straight express bus from the City of Fountain, from the Senior Center, one day a week up to the Garden of the Gods Center.
We approved that already.
You did approve it. Okay. All righty. So we've been working on MOU there for about a year. And so our customers can get services up at Garden of the Gods. They get on in Fountain, and it's just a regular bus route. It goes straight up there. We don't stop anywhere else. And then our bus waits there and brings our people back about approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So if you know people that need to get up there from the Fountain, and anybody can ride it. And so if they live in Fountain, Security, Whitefield, and need to get up there. The other thing is, of course, I'm not sure if I mentioned it here, we do have the EBT cards available now in Fountain, which is a really, really big thing. But so we're excited about these 2 transit services beginning, and any help you guys can give us getting the word out there that they're available to the citizens would be helpful.
Yeah, just real quick, we were talking about Senate Bill 1 earlier. I've been getting updates. The amendment to save that first tranche of money from 267 just passed on the floor of the Senate, so that's been added to the piece of legislation.
Anybody else? We'll start over here, then.
Ken Giray from Manitou Springs. Some of you may have noticed the article in the Gazette this morning about the COG Railway not reopening, having met with the Broadmoor yesterday. It's my impression that they will need some help regionally to see whether it's going to be feasible to reopen the COG. I think that's a tremendous loss, not only for our city, both financially and otherwise, but I think the region. So something that this group may perhaps want to take up at some point if the Broadmoor is looking. I know the Broadmoor will be looking at some regional help to see whether they can rebuild the tracks and get that open. There's no plan immediately, so for the short term, we're assuming that they are closed down. Hopefully that can be changed, but just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Question on that, is it the track bed that's deteriorated?
That's part of the problem. They do need to rebuild the track bed, including putting in ballast underneath, and then once they rebuild that, they'll need to re-engineer the trains and so forth, so that so it's really rebuilding the system from the ground up. Yeah, it's a huge project.
Anybody else? All right. The member meeting schedule is in your packet. Nothing for the board. We are adjourned at 11:20. Thank you, everybody.
Nice job. Nice job.
Oh. Yes.
That does close on Friday the 23rd, so pretty please take your staff and make sure that you get rid of it and keep it.
Thank you, Jessica. I didn't mean to overlook you.
But you just I just give it to anybody?
Yeah. I handed them out at my caucus meeting.
See you later. Okay. Did you?
Yes. I got it. Yeah, what we approved under 10 was interconnection.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. It was, I thought she meant the Garden of the Gods. Park.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was confusing when I heard that, but then I know.
That's what I thought she meant. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. You listen.
You were correct.
Yeah.
Got a meeting done. I went right to her.
No, I was
like, I know you.
Well, I was like seriously trying to figure this out.
It was not good to hear this number.
No. How they wrapped it was the thing I was struggling with. That's all.
You can tag.
Once I finally understood what he was saying, I got it. Why that didn't work. The just recalibrating.
Oh, just recalibrating. Oh, you were correct. I was thinking when you said Garden of the Gods, I thought it was Garden of the Park. And then put the interconnection to right.
Who would have thought it was more? You never know. The feedback we got from Eric certainly it was funny. I think it's right up the street.
Yeah, no, it was some good shape. Yeah, no, I'm not confused because there's a difference.
Come on, Popo. Oh, my Puma boy. I was freezing in here. I'm usually really warm, and this time I'm freezing.
I didn't have much. I got a nice jacket though that keeps me pretty warm, so I didn't have that experience. You want me to grab these cards? These are the ones from Fountain. These are the Fountain players.
Oh, I guess we can take them all in the car.
Since we're south.
Is that?
Yeah, I can put them in. I have a folder that I've been putting in. Right, cool.
Boom, boom. Come on.
It was well deserved.